Hi, everybody. I hope you're doing well, and welcome to week 3 of the Test and Measurements class. And I thought this would be a great opportunity for me to discuss with you guys a case that I worked on related to assessment and give you kind of an idea of how some of the psychological assessment can play itself out in real people's lives. Let me begin by saying that whenever I talk about a case, I will always change a few little details around here and there. For example, if in real life I was working with a male client, I might tell you guys that I worked with a female client. Or in real life, if I worked with a child who was 10 years old, I might tell you guys that the child was 6 years old or whatever. But I do those little changes intentionally in order to protect my client's privacy. I just don't want anybody to have the opportunity to hear the story and think, "Oh gosh, I think I might know that person." So I just want to assure you that if you hear this story and you think that you know this person, then it's just a coincidence because I am changing a few of these details around. But you'll still be able to get the main idea of how the assessment worked and what happened in this person's life. Let's say that I was working with a college population, which I was. I was working in a university counseling center, and I was working with a lot of college students. And there was one case that came through, and let's say that it was a 21-year-old male college student. And this person came in feeling very depressed. And that was the reason that he sought therapy. He wanted to come in for therapy, and he actually had gone to see a different therapist in this clinic. So he wasn't feeling well. He was feeling down and depressed. He wanted help with that. He sought help with therapy. Well, the therapist was just not really getting anywhere. I think they had spent a few months trying to work on the depression and talk about maybe some historical pieces of this person's life that might contribute to the depression. And it just wasn't really going anywhere. He wasn't feeling better. The therapist just kind of felt like things were stagnant in therapy. Like he was kind of spinning his wheels. Couldn't really help the client in the way the client wanted help. And the client was getting a little bit frustrated too because he continued to feel depressed. And as he, got more and more into therapy, it sounded like he was really frustrated with his school. He struggled and he looked around and he couldn't figure out why all of his classmates were doing well in classes, but he was not. And it made him feel very down and discouraged and also kind of worried about his academic standing, financial aid, his parents' approval or disapproval, and those types of things. And it was just all kind of culminating and leaving him feeling really down and depressed. So when the therapy started to feel kind of stagnant to the therapist referred the client to me to do some testing. And that's often what will happen. And that's often the way that testing can be really helpful is when other types of treatments are just kind of hitting some roadblocks and they're not getting anywhere, then psychological assessment can come in and provide some clarity about what's happening with the client. I did a really thorough intake with this client and got a lot of detail about his background, a lot of detail about his current functioning and medical history and that type of thing. I'll share a little bit of that with you guys right now. It turns out that he was physically healthy, never had any major illnesses or even major accidents or complaints or anything like that. He had been born into a family that had several kids, and he was the youngest. So he had, I believe, like 3 older siblings, and they all grew up together in an intact kind of traditional family. He always felt like he was kind of treated like the baby of the family, probably because he was the baby of the family, but he certainly picked up on that, and he felt like he didn't have maybe as much respect as what his siblings did, and that was something that seemed to bother him quite a lot. He also felt a lot of pressure to be successful and kind of follow in his siblings' footsteps, because they had been very successful with their careers and academics and that type of thing. School had always been a little bit of a struggle for him. He was more of like a C student, all through high school, and then definitely in college as well. He was maintaining C's, but he was really frustrated with that because he felt like he was putting in a lot of effort into his studies and attending classes and whatnot, and he felt like the effort that he was putting in was not showing in his grades, and he was frustrated by that. And he would look around at his classmates and friends, and it just looked like they didn't have to try as hard, and he was always struggling with that. What else? So I'm trying to think if there's anything else important. That's probably like the basics of what I can share with you right now. And so I ended up just I wasn't really sure, I didn't have like a specific problem that I was trying to identify for this client. The therapist had asked me to just try to provide some detail about a diagnosis, and I knew that he did have some mild depression. He was feeling really down and discouraged and kind of guilty about who he was as a person, felt like he didn't measure up and those types of things. So I knew that there was some mild depression happening, but I wasn't quite sure, if there was anything else. So I ended up deciding to do a full psychological battery on him. And a battery is basically a collection of assessments or a collection of tests. So a typical battery will involve kind of a variety of tests. So for example, there should be like one test that examines cognitive functioning, another test that examines personality functioning, another test that examines the current mood of the client, and so forth. So when you put all of those together, you have quite a large amount of data about the client that can help you see a more holistic picture of how they're doing. So I did that with him. I gave him a full psychological battery. It took several appointments to make that happen. These tests can be kind of long. And so we had to schedule them over a number of days, and we made it through all the testing. I was able to score all of the tests and then sit down and interpret the tests. And what I found was that he did have that depression that was kind of obvious to all of us that knew him, and obvious to him too. That's why he was seeking help, because he felt depressed. What also came up was that he had a learning disorder in reading. And a learning disorder is where there's a discrepancy between a person's cognitive ability and their academic performance. That basically they're not performing up to the level that they are capable of performing. And so that can leave people feeling extremely frustrated and confused and discouraged, and can be a really problematic challenge for people to try to work through, because it's a chronic type of issue. So what was happening is, in his case, was that he had his cognitive ability scores come back as being very high, well above average, meaning, his brain works cognitively. It's able to think quickly, remember things, put kind of like puzzles together and organize things and see things spatially and figure it out really quickly. And like if words were memorized, he was able to like pull up the definitions of words really quickly. He scored very high when it came to his cognitive ability. But when it came to his academic performance or academic achievement, his score was pretty low in reading. It was okay for other areas like math and writing and those types of kind of basic academic skills, but with reading, it showed a huge discrepancy, meaning he was not able to read at the level that his intelligence says that he's capable of reading at. So when he would sit down to read something, we discovered through this assessment that he was having that experience where he would read and then get to the end of a page and have no clue what he just read. Now, we can all relate to that to some extent. I mean, every one of us has gone through moments like that, where you sit down to read something and then you're like, oh, great, got to redo it. I have no clue what I just read. My mind went somewhere else. That's a normal thing for it to happen every once in a while. But what was happening with this client is that he was doing that with every single thing that he was reading. So he was having trouble processing the information as he would try to take it in. He would sit down and he would try to work on his schoolwork, but the information was not going in properly through the process of reading. And so he was diagnosed with a learning disorder. And when I sat down with him to give him the results, it's a delicate issue to give somebody a diagnosis. And, it can be a difficult thing for people to take in because it just kind of depends on their upbringing and it depends on how they feel about themselves, but it can leave people feeling kind of ashamed of themselves or embarrassed, maybe defective, like there's something wrong with them. And so it's a very delicate thing that I try to be extremely sensitive in how I phrase everything and do whatever I can to make sure that it's a helpful experience, that, learning the diagnosis is something that can help them move forward. So when I sat down with this client, his reaction was actually one of great relief. And interestingly, when I told him that, a learning disorder was detected in the assessment, he started talking very openly about how, oh my gosh, this explains so much. I remember this memory from when I was in second grade and this memory when I was in fifth grade, and this was a struggle and that was a struggle and I've never been able to do this. And oh my gosh, I cannot believe, no wonder I'm having so much difficulty. I can't believe that I'm just now getting this diagnosis. He expressed a lot of relief about getting the diagnosis, and it seemed to help him come to a better acceptance, I think, of who he was as a person. So then at that point, it was time to come up with a treatment plan and figure out, okay, now that we know what's going on, how can we work with this? How can we make life better for him? How can we make school go better for him, and so on. So in his case, we knew that with his particular test scores and the details that came up in the assessment, the difficulty with the reading and whatnot, that he would learn a lot better by listening. And so we made some arrangements in some of his classes, and we filed for certain applications and whatnot, and we were able to get him some accommodations that helped him to learn better. And sure enough, he reported back, the next semester that he was doing a lot better and feeling a lot better. And he continued to see the therapist and work on the depression, and it sounds like the depression started lifting very quickly after this process unfolded with assessment. So this is a success story. It doesn't always happen quite so smoothly or quite so easily as what I've described, but I think it's a great example of how, doing a psychological assessment really does have the potential to improve the quality of people's lives. And that's what I love to see. I love being a part of that process. It is so rewarding to sit down with somebody who's really struggling. I mean, that part's really hard. I don't like to see people struggle, but it's so rewarding to then go through the process of figuring things out and get to the point where we can help that person feel a lot better. So for today, I'll go ahead and start wrapping everything up, but just wanted to share with you an example of what this might look like, and look forward to seeing you guys back next week. Take care, everybody.